Dirty Moderates, we've got a very special show for you today. As you guys know, I have a former life. I think most of you know it's in all the press materials. And if you're devoted to this podcast, as you should be, you won't be surprised by my guest today, because in my former life, I was a Broadway producer. Yes, that very unique, challenging, but wonderful place, I guess, where I earned my epaulets, you might say, even for what I'm doing now. And back in 2020, I was reading, as we all did, that the chief theater critic or co-chief theater critic of the New York Times, Ben Brantley, was going to retire. And why that mattered was I had long wanted to get to know him and be able to spend time with him. But because he was appropriately scrupulous about never crossing any lines, that wouldn't have been possible in my producing career. So all of that is to say, there is a newfound freedom I have. Ben and I have enjoyed each other's company recently, and I really wanted him to join Dirty Moderates. So let's give a warm welcome to Ben Brantley. Hi, Ben.
Hey, Adam. How are you?
Good.
You're not in snow in California. I am in snow in upstate New York.
You're in snow, yeah. Well, we did have, as we were talking about a little bit before, Southern California had some weird thing that looked like snow, but apparently it wasn't snow. So, excuse me,
it wasn't skiing in the vineyards, which is my favorite image of the week.
I know, it's great. So Ben, let's just go back to the beginning. I think most people would like to know, did you always want to be a critic?
Well, I think I grew up with criticism as a point of view in my family. We were a critical family. We would correct one another. We would review one another, essentially. And I know that sounds like a nightmare, but it was actually a very stimulating environment to grow up. There's a lot of affection in it. So I suppose you could say in that sense, I started in journalism very early on because both my parents were journalists. And so I was writing things for the local paper as early as 9 or 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
And at the same time, I was long before that, from the time I first went to the theater, it was something I had a coup de foudre about. I fell in love with it instantaneously, and grew up on the periphery of Wake Forest College, now university, which had a thriving theater program. So I would just hang out in the wings whenever I could, took classes there, appeared as the kid, the necessary child in some productions. And that smell is still the greatest perfume for me, that combination of grease paint and sweat and sawdust. Oh my God. I don't know if you smell sawdust anymore. Probably not.
I love that. Okay. And I know that you eventually, you went to Swarthmore, right? And then you really began your career as a critic at Women's Wear Daily. Is that right?
Yeah, I was there for 7 years. It was a wonderful time. It was the first job I could get right out of college where I could have a byline.
Right.
And I interned at the Village Voice when I was in college. I took a semester off to do that, but this was my first proper job outside of college. I started off in sportswear news, doing business reports. My first headline was "Trend is toward longer skirts and more of them."
Now, wait, I actually don't even know this. I of course know you were Women's Wear Daily, and I want the listeners to know, were you interested in fashion, or were you just...
Not at all.
Not at all? Okay.
No, to the extent that every vain adolescent is interested in fashion, right. I suppose I was, but I didn't. No, I couldn't have done a offhand comparison of Saint Laurent and Karl Lagerfeld. But after I was there for a certain time, that amount of time, that was actually very early on. They transferred me from news, and I was fine in news. That wasn't the reason, but to be a fashion critic for them. So my first reviewing work in New York was as a fashion critic, which turned out to be in some ways very good training for what I did at the Times, because It hones your visual sense and it hones
Mhm.
your visual memory. You look at something walking down the runway in front of you for maybe 20, 35 seconds, and you have to memorize it. And you have to understand its significance, and you have to understand its context with everything else that's being shown to you. So it was good gymnastics for what I did later, as you know, writing honors papers in college was as well.
Right. That's so interesting. And, in those days, like this would be the 80s, I guess. There was
Late 70s. Yeah, I started in 78.
starting 78.
And
I
then
mean,
on into the 80s, yes.
and I remember hearing this. I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but that these fashion magazines, certainly Women's Wear Daily, you had a lot of power,
We did
didn't
in
you?
those days. Well, and women's wear is really the only game in town. It had then transformed into that from a much more sort of sober-sided rag trade paper by my boss, John Fairchild, who
Right.
when he came in, he was to take over the family business essentially. He said, well, this is boring. Let's make this fun. And in the process of insisting that he get the first scoops and the first glances at clothes and all that, he made it an incredibly powerful paper. And the power wound up extending to cafe society or high society, whatever you call it, and on into the arts. For those years, especially the years I was there, yeah, it had a huge influence especially on New York, but also in Paris, where I wound up working.
Right. And speaking of power, which is a good segue, because I want to talk about that. One of the, well, certainly in my time in producing, I know it's really undergone some big changes, but one of the things certainly from my Amen corner of producers is the New York Times, its power. The chief critic of the New York Times is power over the industry to make or break shows. Obviously, one of your predecessors was Frank Rich, who was famously dubbed the Butcher of Broadway. And I've always been fascinated. I mean, it's one of the things about also getting to know you after my career. I happen to think now that looking back that I don't think that that's exactly true. I think it's a bit dogmatic to assert that you have a kind of omnipotent power, right, over how theater works or succeeds. I don't believe that to be true.
No, it's a myth. I mean, because it's the newspaper that reaches the largest number of the theater demographic.
Right.
It does have power in that sense, but you can go way back. I mean, from the beginning of the 20th century, No One Liked Tobacco Road. It became a huge sensation. No, it wasn't Tobacco Road. They liked Tobacco Road. It was A.B.'s Irish Rose. That was a low. It was anathema. And,
oh my God.
It was. I mean, I'm trying to think of a contemporary parallel. Well, Wicked wasn't loved by
right.
critics, and
yeah, Wicked wasn't loved by you, and I happen to firmly agree with you. So I was in that.
Yeah, I mean, someone said when I left, I was being given questions by readers, and one was, "Would you now reconsider your infamous review on Wicked?" And I said, well, no, of course not. I mean, I was responding as I did at that moment. I doubt my opinion of the show would have changed radically. But on the other hand, I think it's wonderful that it's brought in this young, often female, but it's fairly diverse audience that identifies with it very strongly. It's a little like the Joe Iconis thing, "Be More Cool," although that didn't have the stamina,
the power.
That it speaks to that audience. So yes, I think that's good. But power, no, I mean, Frank, had mixed feelings about Cats.
I remember.
I mean,
he did. I remember. Yeah.
So I had mixed feelings about The Lion King. So I think where you had power and where I enjoyed exercising it, really the only time it felt good was when you found someone who perhaps wasn't getting a lot of attention,
right,
that you could praise and explain and introduce to the rest of the world. That's thrilling.
Yeah. Well, you definitely were, and I'm not saying this now, I used to say you definitely were a champion, not just of, you were definitely a champion of the theater, but you championed a lot of artists that I wasn't familiar with. You might say the downtown crowd, and especially if there was something you really loved, like to your point, that was maybe not getting attention or maybe was unknown, you would bring it to attention and you would do it very supportively. I mean, I think that was a very responsible way to criticize. And I think the converse of that is when some of these big turkeys came in, like a Little Mermaid or something, all gloves were off because Well, I mean, they're clearly such cynical enterprises, and you know, they were ripe for the picking, don't you think?
Yeah, especially when they're going by formula. I mean, there was one jukebox musical after another that was, it might have been cast from the same mold. Plastic mold, like those little things you used to do when you were a kid, remember?
Yes.
But they had the same outlines, they had the same structure. In some cases, they worked very successfully, like Jersey Boys. In some cases, it was shameless, like All Shook Up, the Elvis musical, or the Beach Boys musical.
Right.
With Vibrations. But in that case, I think because you're talking about a genre that's being exploited rather literal-mindedly and repetitively and imitatively, that you do have the right to point this out. That's the context you want to provide in that case.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that used to be discussed, you probably knew this, and again, not even knowing you, I was an ardent defender. It'd be like, well, Ben is too downtown, you know, or he didn't like the commercial musical. And I was the guy that being like, well, let's go through the list, you know, and whether it was the deliriously beautiful revival of Kiss Me Kate, that fabulous revival, of course, my beloved Hairspray, a Book of Mormon, Avenue Q. I mean, a lot of the mainstays that were what you might call Tony-winning popular hits, you adored or you were very fond of.
How many of those came from downtown, though? Avenue Q started off at the Vineyard. Rent started off at the New York Theater Workshop. Bring Into Noise, Bring Into Funk.
Which was fabulous. I was just listening to that again. God, is that I was just listening to, I don't know if listeners know, is a show from the 1996 or so that started the public, Bring Into Noise, Bring Into Funk, which was conceived by Savian Glover, was it not?
Glover and George Wolfe.
And George Wolfe, who directed it. It was one of the most electrifying nights in the theater. I to this day, and I can listen to the album and actually conjure that up. The taxi number, I can, the viscera, right, of that.
It's so smart. It's such a tapestry for one thing. It's just so inventive theatrically. Telling the story of Black America through tap dancing, essentially. And Savian Glover is to tap what Fred Astaire is to a different kind of dancing, a ballroom dancing. And it was, that's one of those shows. I mean, the way you talk about listening to it and getting the shivers. I can get shivers just thinking of seeing it for the first time.
You should put it on. I mean, it's certainly if you're doing any cardiovascular activity, but but even still, I mean, I was listening to it in the car on the way up here. So I was like, oh, it's great, you know, and I can't remember.
Hollywood Pastiche, where they do the Shirley Temple visits.
Yeah. Oh, that was so great. Yeah. I know. So for those that didn't know, it was in the same year as of Tony Awards as Rent was. And although Rent did win Best Musical and other awards, Bring In the Noise got 4. George won, George Wolfe for his direction. Savian won, of course. Anne Duquesne, was that her name?
Anne Duquesne. Oh, she was wonderful.
She won Best Featured Actress. Yeah. And there was
so many voices in that.
And there was definitely a fourth one. It's eluding me right now. But it was a very acclaimed show. And that was an example, though, Ben, of a show that really bridged uptown and downtown. Yes. Right?
And I would say Rent did too.
Rent did too, and you loved Rent. I did too.
I loved Rent. I mean, Rent was again a very exciting. Well, that was a particularly exciting opening night because of all the emotional baggage. It opened under the composer Jonathan Larson, the creator of it, composer and writer, had died unexpectedly 2 weeks before the show. Letting critics. No, I think it was just a week, really. So
I think it was more like a week. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a week, in fact, when critics' previews began. So you walked in really more than ever, hoping that it would be decent at least. You know how it's just a sense.
And this obviously is at the New York Theater Workshops where you first saw it.
Workshop downtown, right. Small audience, large. I mean, it was packed, but it's a small house. And you feel very intimate with the people on stage, and the actors in that cast were just overflowing with sorrow, with joy at the chance to translate what the feelings of this man who had died, and it turned out to be so good. In addition to that, you have that as one of those great nights at the theater where you had all this contextual emotion. Going into and informing the experience. But on top of that, it was really good to begin with. And it was
that's so true. As if Rent didn't leave you with tears in your eyes as it is, it was, that's so true. That's interesting. So one of the things I think is interesting is that in view of whether or not the Times Times drama critic have real power, was I will say as a producer, if something opened downtown, and I think this to be true, and you would go and pan it, it was unlikely to move uptown. I mean, and that's okay. I mean, in many ways, you saved us millions of dollars. I mean, that's actually not the worst thing. But I do think in that regard, I can only speak commercially on it. You know, if you delivered a real rave for something that presumably was commercial enough, there was a real impetus for us to move a show.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you bring that up. There's one instance in which I thought virtuously chose not to review something. This was out of town in London. Yeah. And then the show came to Broadway, and I had to express my true feelings about it. And the producer later said, he actually said he thought it was a just review, or one of the more important pans. But he said, I wish you'd written that review in London instead of in New York. So in that sense, I think the New York Times, you know, has certain.
Let me ask you that. Did you choose not to see it because you just knew you weren't going to like it? I mean, why not send someone else who might be more akin to it? Is that the reason?
That I went? Well, I mean, I was the chief critic. The sole chief critic at that point. I had seen it before. I would have been interested. And so I had that background as well. And you'd like to know how it might have changed. It probably should, I think, was changed in some ways for an American audience. Stuff Happens by David Hare certainly was, and really improved, I thought, in the American version.
Right.
Partly because it had American actors and they were American characters mostly. But it had a new emotional fever when it came to America.
Well, definitely. I mean, there were two examples that I remember of shows you love that, one of which I think you had reviewed initially and given encouragement to. One was Moving Out, which had a disastrous Chicago run and was
but
so
I didn't
great.
Review it in Chicago.
No, you didn't review it, but I knew that. But it came to Broadway and was sensational. But Next to Normal, one of my favorite shows, you wrote a really constructive piece of criticism, for lack of a better word.
All of us did at that point. I mean, I think the critics were very good in that instance because I think. Almost to a person, we perceived something of real worth in this, but it had to be pulled out gently. It had to be extricated from some unfortunate choices that surrounded it. And so to have that go to Washington, be reborn there, and then come to New York and really have realized its potential, it's like watching a sort of half-formed kid.
Right. And I think that there's something. I remember that. And I think there's something so terrific in that, because that is the unusual relationship, but a relationship that should be there always, right? Between you or the critic, which is a true art form, and their I guess you would probably say, like, I don't know, like excavation of the process in a way, you know, you being able to say, and I know David Stone, the producer, went and did the work, you know, and you saying to the team, look, I'm not, skinning you guys. I'm not going to, tar you with feathers, but I'm recommending that there's promise here and XYZ would work, very much like what used to be the critics out of town would do. They're not doing it as much anymore. It's sort of a fan club now, which is not helpful. When you take a show out of town.
I mean, I went to see Ragtime out of town.
Right.
I went to see Neverland.
Right.
I was actually not attacked, but accosted by Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, tell us. I didn't know this.
It was in Cambridge. It was opening at the American Repertory Theater. Diane Paulus, who was then the artistic director of it, was involved with it. It had started off in London. This was a musical adaptation of the film with Johnny Depp.
Finding Neverland.
Finding Neverland, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And it hadn't been well received in London, but Weinstein, who I think he had produced Finding Neverland.
Yes, that's right.
So he had a particular attachment to it. He didn't do Shakespeare in Love, by the way. But in any case, he brought it here, had it reincarnated, and we would go. I think our theory was that we would go if it wasn't coming, if it hadn't announced it was coming to Broadway. If it had announced it was coming to Broadway, the theory was that it was essentially still workshopping, and we would wait until it arrived. So I was on Mr. Weinstein really didn't want us to see it at that point. And I was on the train to Boston, to Cambridge, and my phone rang and they said, "Oh, he's just announced he's moving it to New York. Come back." And then other things happened. And in any case, I wound up, it was decided finally that I would see it. And it's too long a backstory to get to that point. But I kept getting, my phone kept ringing, and it was the Rick Miramontes, the press agent on it, saying, sending me text saying, "Harvey, we really like to see you before the show." So I delayed as long as possible. I arrived at 8 o'clock, and just as the lights were going to go down, I slipped into my seat, and then the lights didn't go entirely down. And Harvey Weinstein came out to talk to me.
Oh, jeez. I mean, this is literally like, I mean, he didn't slip you 100, but it's a little bit like Zerma Stalin, the producers, right? Yeah. And so he talked to you, and what did he say? You're going to like this or something?
No, he essentially said, "I don't blame you." And then he did have some very unpleasant things to say about my quote, superiors in management. And then at the end, he said, I don't know if I should be telling this story.
It's fine.
"Hang around for the party afterwards. You can talk to Georgina. She'll be thrilled."
Oh, my God.
Meaning his very elegant fashion designer wife.
Yes.
And in any case, I did not go to the party. And I wrote what was really a tap dancing review. Diane Paulus left a message too. And I think it's true. Things should be allowed to develop. I said, so I cut it some slack. That was a case in which when it came to Broadway, I cut it. I didn't cut it slack.
You didn't. No, of course. But see, now back to, what I was saying to you at the beginning, it's important, you really kept church and state separated in your years at the Times, of course. And, that's an unusual thing where you're out of town. Diane's leaving you a message. Harvey's talking to you. That's not something I would have ever done. Actually, I was thinking about this today. I said, I believe you were coming to my View from the Bridge, and I said hello to you because somebody said, not I didn't go up and schmooze you, but I said hello, and you went hello. So that's really the extent of.
Well, but you sent me that really nice Lamborghini.
And thank you for that rave, Ben. I know. You actually did love that View from the Bridge, but no, I mean
that was fun. Was that your first Broadway production?
Yeah, the View from the Bridge with Anthony. It was Allison Janney was wonderful. Well, what ended up happening was I went and saw it at the Roundabout. And I loved it. And I had been working at a producing office, and I was 22. And I was like, this is really what I want to do. And I want to move this show. And Liz McCann and I had kind of had lunch, and she said, "Well, would you want to do this?" And I went, "I do. Yeah."
It's amazing how effective that play continues to be. Yeah. I've seen 3 fabulous incarnations. The one you were involved with, the Gregory Mosher production with Leah Schreiber and
wonderful.
Jessica Hecht, Scarlett Johansson, and then the Eva von Hove.
It was great
in a totally different direction, but
that was great.
So truly chthonic, almost Greek tragedy about that play which von Hove went as far as you could go with it. That really holds you.
You'll appreciate this story. The headline of your view, and I'm saying this for a reason, the headline of your View from the Bridge review, I don't know if you wrote it or they wrote it, was "Incestuous Longings on the Waterfront." Right. And yes, and I really wanted that in the copy, and my colleagues I wanted to milk that because I thought as I don't know, inappropriate as it sounds, I thought it would be a sort of
that would have been on the
enticing come hither there.
The 1950s paperback with the woman in the slip. Yes. in red and yellow.
I just thought, what if anything would have a come hither air, but that headline, and we didn't. But that was the headline.
Thank you for not doing it, because people would use my
yes.
When I was freelancing before I. Well, actually, I went to Vanity Fair, then the New Yorker, then the Times. But in the period before that, I was freelancing, and I did an interview for Harper's Bazaar with Catherine Deneuve, and who was at that point the movie was called "The Scene of the Crime" or "Scene of the Crime," and so I did the interview, and they ran the interview as I wrote it. The headline ran, and in her recent film, Deneuve goes beyond stardom to become a spellbinding actress. Now, I hadn't seen the movie. I hadn't written about the movie in my copy. That was just in the deck. And imagine my horror when I opened the New York Times and there was my name. Deneuve goes beyond stardom to become a spellbound actress. I have to call and complain about it. But yeah, people would take things from the headlines often. I mean, captions even to well, you were tempted, but I'm glad you didn't.
No, we didn't. Well, I was going to add something, and I think it's worth you and I telling this to the audience. In my years when we had mixed reviews from you, where you'd have like some very good things to say, my press agent invariably, I used to say, call Ben and see if we can use this, because of course I wouldn't do that, because you see those quotes, maybe people are a little green and don't know, but when you see stupendous and they just leave off piece of shit, So I just wanted to always the idea was we had to ask for permission, and you would often grant it. I guess we never asked for anything that was gonna misrepresent what you said. But.
Well, the one that kind of haunts me was I did not say this in print. I was being interviewed at some NPR station. It was after the Book of Mormon had come out, and someone said, "Well, how would you say it ranks? With what you've seen, we're early in the 21st century." And I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "I guess since we're early in the 21st century, I could call it the best musical of the century." But
they use that.
A lot more to come, and it's the best musical of the century. It suggests a level of hyperbole. Of which I'm capable, but which I was not using in that case.
No, and which you totally adored, rightfully so. The Book of Mormon. It was a beautiful. It was a run to the box office rave. They didn't really need that quote. I mean, it's running 11 years. They still sell out. Whenever you did this, it was probably
sell out. I wonder though if it opened now, if it would be as well received.
I just saw the tour again because my friend loved it, and out in LA at the Pantages. It's such a good show. And I had heard, by the way, that and I'm not enough of a devotee to remember everything in the book. I had heard it was sanitized. I didn't notice anything. I mean, they didn't spare anything. They were still doing all the African stuff and the fuck and the AIDS and all that stuff. So I don't know what was changed. Remember, was the New York Times did a piece how they were Casey and the South Park guy, Casey Nicolau and the South Park guys, want to go back and do some rewrites, but I didn't see any.
No, I'm just grinning at that particular African expression. It's
right.
The South Park sensibility, and South Park, South Park lives. You can still watch it. You can see Meghan and Harry being deconstructed.
I love that. I thought that was great. Yeah.
So I guess there would be. But I still think it would have a harder time, even in its whatever sanitized form it exists now, in coming to Broadway right now as a new musical.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And speaking of musicals, did you fall in love with cast albums as a young kid? Was that the introduction? Yeah. I mean, was that the sort of rite of passage, or did you go to theater in Winston-Salem, or no?
It was both. As I said, the college, I think the only autograph I ever asked for was Susan Irving, the junior at Wake Forest, who played Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady.
You were so taken with her. I love it.
Well, those things seem very sophisticated to me. I think the first one I probably saw when I was 5 or 6 was Bye Bye Birdie up there. We had the cast albums. I remember, I think the first record I ever bought, I went halvesies with my sister to buy Hello Dolly with Carol Channing. Even though I didn't get to New York until I was 16 years old for the first time and never see a Broadway show before then, I had a very specific idea of what it was going to be like, from reading the liner notes, from memorizing the lyrics, listening to these stars would appear on television occasionally. It clearly wasn't their element, but it was great fun to see Carol Channing, Carol Burnett show or whatever it happened to be. But and also I was one of those, pathetic kids who would go into the stacks, again, at the college library, where all the theater world books were.
I remember those.
High school yearbooks for the year in theater. And I would just look at every picture and develop myths, my own personal myths around people like Julie Harris and Maureen Stapleton. And,
because I mean, it must be said at the beginning of your tenure, the other thing that I thought was also patently false, but the industry is always going to have a basically antagonistic relationship with whoever the critic is, was that you didn't like musicals. You only like edgy downtown plays. Of course. No, I mean, that was,
musicals are a religion to me. if a musical works even halfway,
Yeah.
I will cry. I will cry. It can be a
love that.
mediocre musical, but there's something about the chaos, the sorrows, the extreme emotions, the joy of life being translated into perfectly rendered song and dance. It's
Yeah.
finding the rhythm, so to speak, in life, finding the harmony that just makes me cry if it's at all sincere and well done.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always say, you know, and not just with my own work, but watching other people's work, is when people still all the time say, "Would you come see this musical for me?" or "What do you think of this idea?" And I always tell people, now don't go so far afield. Go back to basics and say, and there's no formula. If we had it, we would all get it. Does this material have a definitive reason to sing? Because does all the world's problems essentially need to be resolved in song and dance? Because if it does not, it's probably not going to work.
No, it's good advice. What would you have said to Mel Brooks?
Oh, that's maybe I'm slightly biased. I'm a Mel Brooks fan. I mean, growing up and watching, well, I was too young, but watching them later, you know, putting on the Ritz and you know, Frank Sandwich. But how about the Inquisition and History of the World is a show? It's a great movie. It's show stopping.
And don't forget Lily von Stroop.
Oh, Lily von Stroop, Marlene Dietrich, right? And then of course in all of his To Be or Not to Be, when he did that remake, it's song after song, you know, Sweet Georgia Brown and a little piece of Poland and a little piece of France. They were satirizing the Hitler's conquest, you know. And so I think and the producers, of course, no, I think that naturally sang. And it's the reason actually when the late Margot Lyon, who brought me into Hairspray, because I was essentially mentored by her and then partnered with her to do the show, when she said, "What about Hairspray?" When she called me, my first immediate instinct was yes,
because if you know, sang for the
right, it was so vibrantly alive, and it had all the elements that you think a show should have. And of course, in that instance, you get it very right. But you know what I mean. But there was
and there's a heightened. I don't want to call it camp because it's more than camp, but there's a heightened sense of everyone being some kind of impersonator in John Waters. That's so theatrical. No, I thought that translated beautifully, and also the period. I mean, you had, if you got the right songwriters, and you certainly did, you had the soundtrack just waiting to happen.
It was so true, and bringing Harvey back in a role, and Harvey was so wonderful as Edna. You know, and he's such a wonderful actor. Matter of fact, I went back today to see what remind myself. You called this performance captivatingly humane. I thought that's a great way to. Yeah, you know, because he really was.
No, I mean, I think he always. I listened to his memoir recently.
Did you enjoy it?
I did, and I think from the beginning he created characters with such empathy. Sometimes it can go over a little the line into pure sentimentality. I think.
For sure, yeah.
But when he, especially as a performer, when he captures that, first time I ever saw him was in something that got panned. I was in college still, called Flatbush Tosca.
I've never even heard of that. Wow.
Which was, you know, Tosca as a go, a Flatbush, with Harvey as Tosca. It was, but the great, and Harvey obviously wasn't exclusively a drag performer, but I think in the great drag performers, obviously it's such a topic right now, but in the tradition of drag performance in the New York theater, Charles Ludlam, Lipsinka, Harvey, there is such a warmth and such an affection for the subject. I don't think there's anything grotesquely burlesque about it. I mean, there are those elements of what drag artists were the first to show us, I think, that what we think of as quote woman, especially in America in the middle of the century, was a pair of eyebrows, lipstick, hair in a certain way. It was all a mask. So much of it was artifice.
Wow. Ben, what do you, it's actually on that subject, what do you, I want to say, what do you think about all this attacks on drag queens? I know the answer to that, but what do you think is underlying that in terms of...
You're asking me to sort of go into the soul of America, which is not a place I want to go.
I'm asking you for...
I mean, you see what the the party line from our side is, which is obviously people are uncomfortable with their own masculinity. I think
Right.
part of it, I mean, that would probably be true, but I also think part of it is that we are in a time of such flux anyway, when people are looking for stable identities. They're wanting to claim their particular identity on both sides of the political spectrum more soundly than ever. So I think the kind of fluidity, the possibility of the blurring of lines that drag performance suggest can be unsettling for people who aren't secure in their own.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's great. The larger question I did want to ask you, which is not about the soul of America, but in my graduate work, and was sort of what brought me here, is politics and culture are inextricably intertwined, right?
Sure.
They're not in separate airtight compartments. Some people think politics is downstream of culture. Other people think culture is downstream of politics. But that said, how would you say, just in the main, your politics affected your work as a critic? Or did it inform it in any way? And I'm not even talking about ideologically.
You're not a blank slate. I mean, as much as we'd all like to pretend we are.
Yeah.
And to some extent, you're reflecting the culture and the mindset of the place you work, which happily, in my case, was a natural alliance of perspectives, I think. I didn't ever evaluate things according to good intentions. I think you can only give so many points for that. I think you apply the same standards of consistency, of sensibility, of the portrait you're presenting, how it's framed. Is it all one worldview? Is it tight? Is it convincing in and of itself? I think you apply those standards to what it is, no matter what the politics are. When I first got to the Times, it wasn't too long after Jesse Helms's, the North Carolina Senator Jesse Helms's denunciation of certain performance artists, whom I subsequently reviewed, and in the case of Karen Finley, found a lot of worth. So, I mean, what's happening now has happened before. It's happened within my professional lifetime at the New York Times, but it's what's most unsettling to me, what's most disturbing to me, is when things are reviewed by people who have never seen them, are encapsulated, are presented as being this. I mean, I saw that with Karen Finley. There was a real artistry there. Yes, she was the woman who rolled naked in chocolate, but she did it very well. There was a real point to it. Wasn't
Jesse Helms the famous segregationist, homophobic senator from North Carolina's jam, right? The Serrano's Christ in a jar of urine didn't work for him either. So wasn't that Serrano?
No, my mother went on a blind date with him in college.
Oh my gosh.
No, nothing. I kept saying, Mom, he attacked you afterwards. We have to come forward with this.
I didn't know that the Brantleys even would know the Helmses, but I guess it was
he was actually a student at Wake Forest where my grandfather taught, and he was boarding in their house.
Isn't that interesting? And interestingly, a political thing, he was a Democrat then. In those days, he was a Dixiecrat.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. He was a North Carolina Dixiecrat. What I also, your point of criticism, good intentions, or how does things cohere? This is another interesting thing. Just let me say this. I've never noticed any bias in your work, back to my earlier question. So I think that was beautiful. I never thought you had one position or another, because I thought you did what the best critics do. But the job of the critic, and you did it very exceptionally, was review the show that you see. Not the show that you want to see. No, I mean, I'm not trying to be obvious or pedestrian. I mean, you got to go in, and I know you would be surprised all the time. You'd be disappointed. But, if you didn't agree with something, if the musical swept you off your feet, you weren't penalizing the musical for that, nor were you going in and sort of compelling or suggesting that musicals adhere to some kind of weird cultural or McCarthyite standard, which is going on now. I feel there's a chill in the air, and that, if you are to pan, let's say, an African-American play, you're probably a racist. Obviously, there's never been a bad African-American play. Ha ha ha. So, I mean, we saw this with your colleague, Jesse Green, reviewing the musical K-pop, which clearly he just didn't like. But it turned into an anti-Asian tirade and all these
racist, and praise is really wrenched out of context in that case.
Yeah, and don't you think that that this is a tough time to be writing?
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is. And I mean, in some ways, I think it's a very fecund time for theater. I don't think it is for criticism. I think what's happening now is it's a time of reckoning where people who have felt underrepresented in the past are looking, understandably, to see themselves more fully represented on stage. The downside of people becoming more secure in their identities is that they also become more isolated in their identities, more removed from the other. I mean, I know there have been suggestions that that perhaps only people who understand what's going on stage from a personal point of view. In other words, perhaps only Black critics should write about Black plays. Perhaps only disabled people should write about plays.
This has been contemplated, or it's actually under. What I didn't hear what you said at the beginning.
I know it's been suggested.
Okay.
I know at the times because we didn't have a Black critic in theater when I was there. At least not. Well, we had Margot Jefferson, the divine Margot Jefferson from before, but for much, but that was actually those standards weren't being applied then. It was sort of more the individual voice as opposed to the voice of the person defined by race, color, sexual identity, and so forth. So yes, there had been playwrights, certainly Black playwrights, who have said they would prefer a Black critic go, or in some cases would want only Black people to see the play. I mean, one of the times I was certainly conscious of I wasn't the target audience was when I went to a play called What to Send Up When It Goes Down by Alicia Harris. A very good play and an interactive play created in response to well, this was before the Black Lives Matter movement, but to the killings by police of Black youths, so we went into we formed circles, we exchanged words and so forth, but it was essentially for Black people. She called it an anger spittoon, that it had that particular cathartic value, and I was impressed by it. I liked writing about it, but what should the critic who is not of the same race, color, sexuality of the playwright or of the performers on stage, should that critic work as a bridge to other people who are not perhaps like that, or should we have people talking only to their own communities? It's kind of a Tower of Babel thing, isn't it?
It is. It's also it's. I would say, cue the Orwell. The party told you to obey its final command. I mean, I find this so. Obviously, these are my politics. I find this so abhorrent and so inimical to democratic thought, free expression, an exchange of ideas. Yeah,
but don't you think it's a necessary period? I mean, I don't.
You mean to have only Black critics review Black shows? No.
Oh, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's just something that's being discussed. I think I just was showing it as talking about it as an indication of the mindset now. And I think you're right. I think it's dangerous once you start isolating cultural stratums like that, because ideally, theater is a place that brings people of many disparate sensibilities together. And it allows you to empathize because of the visceral immediacy of just the physicality of theater. It allows you to empathize in a way I think no other art form gives you.
I know. It's amazing. And also, if you think about it this way, you going in to review a play, it could be a whatever, it could be a Latino play, doesn't matter, right? I mean, you're going to bring a perspective, right? You're not bringing the presumption isn't you're bringing in an inherently biased perspective. That's the problem with this idea. You're going to bring a perspective. And you know what? You're going to hold that art to the same standard as you hold all the art, rather than think about right, condescending to it and being like, well, I can't really pan this or dislike it because for fear of political reprisal. I mean, that's not your job.
No, I think
as a
your
critic.
job though is to be respectful, to be polite.
Yes. Well, you always are. You would not be. Right.
And also, but where, for Stephen Adley Gurgis, I think is probably, one of the great American playwrights.
Me. Oh, I did. I love, by the way, since I last saw you, I went and saw,
Between Riverside and Crazy.
oh my God, how could I forget
What
that?
a great play.
Great.
Major play.
What a major play. And Common was terrific too. Everybody else was terrific, but Common was it. Oh, it was so wonderful. I love him too. He's one of,
yeah. First of all, he brings this charisma onto the stage, but he doesn't overwhelm anyone else. He really worked well in the ensemble, I thought too. Yeah, he was terrific. And of course, Stephen McKinley Henderson.
Yeah.
Should win the Tony.
Yeah. So to the thing about Gurgis, what I love about him is he always upends your expectations.
He does. Because people are inconsistent. We are by nature. That's one of the things that scares me a little about this time is everything needs to be either or.
Right.
And life is not binary. It's and Burgess creates character after character who contradicts themselves again and again. People are not, they're patterns, they are personalities, but people are never absolutely true to themselves or the
No, that's so true, folks. Just we're talking about there's a wonderful play. Well, it's not there anymore. Called Between Riverside and Crazy. The playwright is Stephen Adley Gurgis. He wrote The Motherfucker with a Hat. He wrote Jesus Hop the A Train. If you love theater and are not familiar with him, seek him out immediately. This particular play, Ben, came out in I think 2013. And never had transferred.
Surprise, yeah.
And won the Pulitzer Prize.
It transferred. I think it started off at Atlantic, wasn't it?
I think so.
Started off downtown and then transferred to second stage off Broadway, but still off Broadway, but closer to Broadway. And then it was finally reincarnated with much of the same cast in this past year, actually as a Broadway show. But in the meantime, it had won the Pulitzer Prize.
It's absolutely wonderful. And I wasn't even familiar with it until I saw, and I ran as soon as I knew. So anyway, that was great. But that's a good. Oh, sorry. And you started to say, let's go back to that. Gurgis is a good example.
So who is the person who should be interviewing Gurgis? What critic ideally should be interviewing Gurgis? Because he's sort of a melting pot.
He is I don't know. He's admittedly. But interestingly enough, that's why I think his writing is, well, certainly on that play, is so compelling. Because he's had we're all, like you said, we're not consistent with ourselves, and we're all wrestling with identity in one way or another.
He hears the language of self-deception.
Yeah.
The people creating myths as they talk about themselves, looking for things to ballast these delusions they have about themselves. I think he's great. I think he has as individual a language as Mamet. It's not as showily cadenced as Mamet's is.
Right.
But it's that's what was most exciting to me throughout the job would be when you would come upon an original voice, someone who was using words or music in a way no one had before.
Right. No. Yeah. He's got, and I guess to say it another way to say it is, I always feel like he writes the way people talk.
Yes.
His language isn't stilted. It's not stilted.
No, he doesn't. Tennessee Williams doesn't write the way people talk.
No.
Susan Laurie Parks, so I think is another one of our
wonderful
playwrights. Even when she's doing fairly naturalistic work, it's not the way people talk, because theater, this is what you want. You want a certain kind of heightening. You want the illusion of literal representation.
Right.
But it has to be only the illusion, because it's art.
Yeah, no, that's true. Now, Ben, let's jump back for a second. You got to the New York Times as the second string critic in 93?
93, yes.
And what was the first show? Do you remember the first show you reviewed?
Sure. Immortally.
Okay.
It was Annie Warbucks.
I saw that at the Variety Arts. Oh my God. Go on, tell us. I didn't read the review at the time, but yeah.
It was my first review. The press rep was not happy that Frank wasn't doing it. And the new guy, who no one knew anything about, who had no professional background in theater reviewing. And it was right across the street from where I was living in the East Village. So I knew that I would be living with, if it would be a reproachful presence if I didn't like it every time I walked the subway. And it didn't work for me. It had been
Yeah,
the
not
work
for
of
me either.
much reassembling, and trying to, recreate the formula that had made Annie so against the odds incredibly winning, the original Annie, that is. But I was really relieved watching it because I knew exactly what I was going to say. I
Huh.
realized almost immediately this is a natural fit for me, and I went home and I wrote it, and they liked it. There was very little changed, and I don't think there was really anything changed, except I think I may have misspelled Ming Cho Lee's name. But then I remember actually going to Jim Spa on St. Mark's Place at 4 a.m. to see it so I could see it in print. My first byline as a theater critic in the New York Times.
Yeah, in the days you could go get the paper. Not that you can't now, but was interesting.
I,
Right.
I don't
So,
see the paper except online now.
right. No, I know. I mean, we as producers used to wait for your review to come down to the
Yeah.
New York Times building and get it, see if we could get first look at it. Okay. And so then you were second string. And then what was the order of events and how did you get thrust into the chair into the top seat?
Well, Frank left, and David Richards, who had been the Sunday critic, who'd come from the Washington Post to be the Times Sunday critic, he had been assured that when Frank left, he would inherit the job.
Okay.
He inherited it. He didn't enjoy it. He left. He was not fired. He left a year into it. They felt that I still needed some more seasoning before I ascended to the throne, as it were. Vincent Canby did it, I think, for another year, and I became chief theater critic in 1996.
Right. Or the season of Rent and Noise Funk. You were.
Season of Rent and Noise
Funk. I mean, that could make you be incredibly optimistic about the art form.
Well, there were great things early on. I mean, the performance, I know you think very highly of, is still one of my shiver-making moments is Janet McTeer in A Doll's House.
It's my favorite. My favorite performance by an actress on the stage. I've certainly seen things that have been enthrallingly good and maybe as good. I don't know that I've ever seen anything better. Shivers is what I got. I
cried so hard. I mean, and this was A Doll's House. I remember going to it with great skepticism. And one thing that has continually surprised me in this the job is how great Ibsen is, how well he works. I mean, I began to think of him in sort of academic terms as a propagandist, and then you see A Doll's House, and it is political. I mean, speaking, going to a particular subject, in the best possible sense.
Oh yeah, I mean that was Anthony Page's production was beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, and I did. There were some wonderful things. Listen, there were some wonderful things till the end. That you saw. I mean, you've often said that during your tenure, Broadway has gotten Vegasized or sort of Disneyized, and not always literally. Expound on that.
Well, that was starting to shift a little in the last years. But I think with the Disneyfication of Times Square, and then with Beauty and the Beast being a big hit, and then The Lion King going through the ceiling, and obviously not everything worked. But there was a sense that the theme park element that was introduced probably by Phantom of the Opera needed to be run with and expanded, that if people were going to spend that much money, and the money would be a lot more once you put in all those elements, that they would want to see, they'd want to be thrilled as if they'd gone to Six Flags Over Georgia or to Disney World. So there was definitely that element, the fact that it became a sort of temple for celebrity worship, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad, is sort of a Vegas thing. But on the other hand, and can we say his name? I mean, Scott Rudin, the disgraced producer.
We don't cancel here. So.
Really brought such vitality to Broadway.
He had impeccable taste.
Oh, I mean, the Ivo van Hove productions, the Arthur Miller plays, the Lucas and Eighth Doll's House, Lucas and Eighth period. So I was beginning to see, I mean, what it must have been like in the 30s and 40s a little bit. I mean, there was so much good theater happening in my last years there. Jackie Sibley's Drury, Fairview, just amazing. Someone who could, and Top Dog Underdog was one of my early. It's
wonderful. Yeah, and you and I both just saw the wonderful revival.
Brilliant. No,
brilliant.
She's like our Carol Churchill.
Yeah.
She play every time she writes it.
Yeah, that's so true. So Ben, you're there 27 years.
Yeah.
And in that period, you never got tired of it. It was really the COVID lockdown that kind of, harshed your mellow a little bit, right?
Also, and I was aware that the theater would be changing, and that that criticism was going to, of necessity, become much more self-conscious and much more cautious. And I think that's necessary to the times, but it also was just what a great moment to be able to leave when there was that pause.
There was that pause. Yeah. And, it's interesting, the antagonistic relationship, which is ridiculous sometimes between producers and critics, or shows, artists and critics. And then the sort of flip side of it, which I think in our own time doesn't get enough ink. People don't think about it enough, is criticism as an art form, as a discourse, really. It's a dialectic
it's a vanishing art form.
It is, and the idea, it did seem like, of course, Jesse Green joined you as co-chief theater critic like in 2017, a few years before you left, but mainly you were the chief theater critic, and it comes with a name. Oh, Ben Brantley of the New York Times. Did Brantley review it? Did he like it? Or there's that website that did he like it?
Right,
yeah. Explain to me, I'm reading the Times and I'm seeing like a chair rotation. Like every show seems to have a different name or a different byline. Not that Jesse isn't there, but there's some good people, but all of a sudden out of nowhere, you'll see someone that is really reviewing a first tier show.
I'm not here, so I don't really know what the protocol is. Jesse always, I know, has first choice and reviews most of the Broadway productions, which aren't always the most exciting ones these days. But and then we have a chorus of voices, some very different voices. I think the idea is criticism, perhaps more as a collective from an institution with a lot of different input, a dialogue among different voices. Which actually Jesse, when he was interviewed, I think for American Theater before he came to the Times, said he wanted us, that is, he and I, to be able to have a discourse, to have a conversation, to be able to dispute certain things. Of course, we don't exactly come from different demographics.
No, but actually that experiment, and it was long after I was producing, but I thought that was actually a wonderful thing, because what was nice is you have two top tier. Jesse was so good. It was at New York Magazine. He was such a good, and then you shared a chair with him, and you guys did have different aesthetics sometimes. So if you didn't know, if you got Jesse, you might get a rave, or vice versa. We did, one didn't know, and at least there were two authoritative voices. I think that's not, in a business where all the money's on the line, that wasn't the worst thing in the world from a commercial perspective. Yeah, I think it was good. Why did Jesse join you? Was that because at that point you felt it? Was that up to you? Did you want a little bit of a?
No. I think Charles left.
Oh yes, right.
And I think they looked hard for who they thought was the most authoritative voice. And also, if Jesse came in, it wouldn't have made sense for him to be a second string critic.
No, of course.
His status elsewhere.
Right.
And he was a good choice. I think there are other people who would have been good too. Helen Shaw, I think, is a wonderful critic at
the New Yorker. Yeah, she really is. Yeah. So Ben, through your tenure, obviously you have the highs and the lows. What I want to ask you a few of those questions. What, you said Janet McTeer. What are some of your favorite performances in a play through your time at the
in a play? Liev Schreiber in a lot of things. In Glengarry Glen Ross.
He was great.
Brilliant. In Betrayal, otherwise not very good revival of Betrayal, he just got it. He nailed that character. He sort of turned it into Harold Pinter.
Right.
And Talk Radio, and Eric Bogosian's Talk Radio.
It's great too.
It's a great portrait of a meltdown, of a human meltdown. Simon Russell Beale in pretty much anything. Yeah. He's still my favorite Hamlet, because you could just see.
That's amazing.
And feel it second by second. Mark Rylance.
Oh yeah, can do no wrong, right? Yeah.
Oh gosh, 12th Night. I mean, people often ask what would be the show you'd like to see if you knew you were never going to see a play again, and this would stay in your mind forever. It would be the Globe, Shakespeare's Globe, 12th Night with Rylance as Olivia. Also, I mean, from another side of another country, virtually, um, Kate Valk of the Worcester Group is a brilliant, disciplined performer. Uses a much more surrealistic but very, very formal style, as particular as ballet for acting, and I think she's just extraordinary. So, so all of that, high points for sure.
Yeah, and the musical side, who were some of your favorites?
Donna Murphy,
Wonderful Town, yeah.
Wonderful Town. I don't know if you saw the concert production of Anyone Can Whistle, in which she played Cora, the corrupt mayoress. No, the other one who does this in musicals is Christine Ebersole and Audra McDonald.
Audra, of course.
I think they have such when it's a period musical, or a musical is set in a certain period, they do their homework. They really do their research, and they imbibe the styles of that time and then filter it through their own very distinctive selves. I have enormous respect for all of them. Bernadette Peters, who doesn't do period so much as that, but there is such psychological nuance in every line she sings. She's a great singing actress, acting singer.
And Patty, were you a Patty LuPone fan?
Oh, yeah. Patty's her own elemental voice. One of my favorite theater stories involves Patty. I'd seen her, and by the way, she's a very good straight dramatic actress.
Yes, I've seen her in Mammoth,
and wonderful in Mammoth.
Yeah,
but she was doing Mama Rose at Encores, and it was a slightly campy performance. I wasn't bowled over by it. I reviewed it in those terms, and I heard it was coming to Broadway, and I wasn't thrilled by the idea. I said, no. Arthur Lawrence was directing. I thought, we just had Bernadette, which was sort of a revolutionary Rose. Do we need another kind of Ethel Merman kind of performance, in quotation marks? And then it opened, and she was fabulous. All that sort of psychological nuance she brought to her straight acting, she delivered in this Rose, and then the way it was translated into song, overwhelming song. But in any case, so in my review, I said, she was great, blah, blah, blah. And I said, and yes, that quiet munching noise you hear is me eating my hat.
Oh, yeah.
The next day in the office, there arrived a giant hat box, and it was a chocolate cowboy hat from Patti LuPone.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's and that right there encapsulates one of the reasons I want to have you on. I wanted to have you on for many reasons, was because you are willing to go and say, yeah, hey, listen, I saw you, not that you changed your mind, you saw it differently. You've been quoted.
It was better. It was better. She had improved.
She had, but I'm sure there are people who might die on that hill because they want to continue to hold the fact that they didn't like it, but that you did like it. And also,
what's most exciting is when people turn it around. It's like Next to Normal, which you mentioned earlier. When you see something and it's not quite there yet, and then it gets there. And that to me is thrilling. One other high point for me always during my tenure was the younger Irish playwrights, or Anglo-Irish playwrights. Conor McPherson, I think, is a genius. Martin McDonough, in a very different way, is
love him too. Yeah, no, that's a good point. But you would always say, or I've heard you quoted as saying, and people would say to you, well, you didn't see the same show I did. And you're like, no, I didn't.
No.
I love that, and so it's.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, theater changes from night to night. So it's possible you can see it on the same night. But also, you were sitting in a different seat, and you bring a whole different different history to a play. And I think what's happening now in terms of what you find anathema is people wanting every critic to acknowledge their history. And notice I'm using the neutral pronoun.
Yes, I know. Don't worry, you won't get canceled here. Well, you did have a little kerfuffle there. Although
that was awful. That was probably the lowest point for me in terms of feeling bad. Was when I reviewed Head Over Heels, a musical that used the songs of the Go-Go's, and to me it seemed kind of uncool, having come of age in New York, in the days of the Pyramid Club and so forth. I thought it was very it was very wholesome, and we must all embrace each other, and sweet and cute and cheerful, and but there was nothing dangerous or terribly exciting about it, which you do want in a musical. In any case, in my review, I was talking about
Peppermint or something. Right?
Peppermint, the drag star, who played a character whose husband, former husband, and one of the reasons they'd broken up was that the character played by Peppermint no longer wanted to be perceived exclusively as a she, but as a they. So when I wrote about that transition, I said, and he learns to appreciate Peppermint, learns to appreciate her, excuse me, I mean they, reflecting the evolution in the script. Well, people took this as a withering put down of people's choice of gender, which was not at all what I intended.
Of course.
But it was lacerating. I got emails, and it did impress me that the trans community was so energized, and it came together like that. But people, wishing I would die painfully, be burned. I should never be allowed to set foot in a Broadway theater again. The level of discourse from all sides is perhaps overheated at this moment.
No, that's very true. I mean, no, and that's what goes on. Things are taken to a fever pitch, and you think about that, which obviously you didn't do intentionally, and you've been very contrite about, and you meant it.
I issued an apology, and people still said I should be crucified.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's where we are now. I mean, there's no chance that people. I'm not agreeing with this. This is just one of our cultural cultural devolutionary moments, in my opinion, where there is no road for redemption. There is no way that we can err. If you make the most minor mistake, it's to the guillotine. You go.
Well, and also, it bothers me when it's taken out of context.
Of course, but also that's not even what you intended. So,
but that's happening on both sides. I mean,
I know. Oh no, listen, no, I mean, all of this.
Look at Exhibit A, Fox News at this very moment taking the January.
Horrible! And listen, I mean, banning books, not having African American AP history, AP studies. I mean, it goes on. Banning drag queen. The whole thing is of course they're all versions of the same authoritarian coin.
It is Tower of Babel. We're very splintered.
Yep. We are, and it is. It's the authoritarianism, right and left, is the coin of today's realm, I'd say, and that's scary. And even though they are still the fringes are the loudest. Yeah. We at Dirty Moderative, staked out a claim because I am truly in the middle. Yeah. And that doesn't mean I don't believe anything. It just means I reject extremes.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I do. But I mean, on the other hand, more power to the fringes because it's the only way change happens.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Depends, but it depends on the change.
Yeah. But you have to,
now, Ben.
Yes, after you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Ben. So, just before we go, do you miss the job? Do you feel like you?
No. I'm quite contented in my life. Occasionally, it was interesting. The first time since I'd left the job, I went to see a production of Hamlet that came to the Park Avenue Armory. Do you remember that with what's his name? Alex, what is his name? The actor. He was in The Jungle as well.
No, I didn't see it.
In any case, it's not that I thought it was a great production, but it was Robert Icke.
I didn't see it.
And it wasn't that I thought it was a great production at all, but Hamlet for me is a play that allows, as great art should, endless opportunity for conversation, to continue the dialogue, to present a new point of view. And I wanted to address what they were trying to do with it as yet another perspective on Hamlet. I missed it then. Generally, I don't. I mean, I see things that I like that I'd be happy to cheerlead for, like Kimberly Akimbo. I really enjoyed.
Didn't you enjoy that? I loved that. You liked that a lot.
Wonderful show, but there's such a gravity in it as well as a joy.
There is. I loved it. I think did I tell you I had loved it when I saw it last trip?
Yeah,
we discussed. It's wonderful. Yeah. Well, I suppose I know the answer to this, but I guess you're never not a critic, right? You don't just go.
Oh no, that's very true. I do watch things as a critic, with rather relaxed, but I still probably have a lead in my head when I walk out of something. I mean, this is muscle memory by this time.
No, it is. And you know what? 27 years is an amazing time. You left a great legacy. I think you were the last of that tradition of theater critics. And I think, your voice is missing at the times, but we're happy for you. And all of that is to say that from time to time, we do cultural episodes on the show here, and I really wanted to have you do the maiden voyage because I thought,
thank you. I'm honored. I didn't realize.
Yes, this is
maiden. Okay,
yes, maiden. No, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing because also when it makes me sad to hear it's a dying art form because I love it too, and I love to read it, write it, and think about it myself.
And dying art forms have a way of being reincarnated. In some years, it's a difficult time to be a critic, I think. And I admire those fighting the fight.
Right. Well, indeed. Ben Brantley, thank you for being my guest. I really appreciate it. I always love our robust discussions, and we'll have you back, I'm sure, and we'll have plenty more to talk about. So thank you for joining us, Dirty Moderates. Thank you for listening to this. And as always, stay dirty, stay moderate, and stay safe.